Adolescence is a period of storm and stress. Several changes are happening within the child's brain and also in their environment. And a classroom, imagine of 20 or 30 children, is going to be a space where there are a lot of changes that the teacher needs to understand. One of the aspects of these changes are hormonal changes. For boys, it's usually testosterone. And testosterone, when it's in a surge or in a high, boys tend to have aggressive behavior. They tend to be violent. They may use words that they don't normally use because they're unable to regulate emotion, especially rage or anger. The same thing with girls with progesterone being high would show up as daydreaming, sometimes as fidgeting, and some girls may even tend to cry when there is no specific trigger for the behavior. And so when these are all perceived as difficult behaviors, teachers tend to pick on children who are actually struggling with hormonal changes. Another aspect of the teenage brain that teachers need to understand is that the limbic system or the emotional part of the brain tends to work a lot more than the frontal lobe, which is the thinking aspect. When the limbic system or the emotional part of the brain is reacting to something, it's difficult for the teenager to regulate their emotion and to sometimes listen to someone and follow an instruction. As a 5th standard, 6th standard teacher, you may have noticed many times that as soon as you say children and then you have like 15 boys running out of their place and coming to the desk. That's because the moment you call out, they think that they're supposed to follow through with an action. All these cannot be considered behavioral problems. In addition to this, there is this huge impact of media and social media on the current teenager where violence is glorified. When all this is externally influencing the teenager, it's very difficult for them to understand what is expected behavior within the classroom, and just punishment does not help. And this is where many children will show an academic drop. I've seen in many parent-teacher meetings, there will be parents saying, ma'am, till last year he was studying, he was scoring 90. This year he's not able to do this. And what has happened is the teacher not good or something like that. And then the way we cope with this is not actually deal with the cause, but we tend to send them for more tuitions. The academic drop is only a symptom of something deeper that's happening within the brain, within the mind. The second area that I normally see in classrooms, especially around adolescence, is that the child starts clowning around. They realize that this is the only way I'm able to deal with my emotions, because the moment I start making the whole class laugh, I have this window of 30-40 seconds when I'm able to get back in touch with myself and regulate behavior. But this same behavior is looked at by the teacher as a child who's trying to distract the whole class and divert the whole class, and again this child tends to get excluded within the classroom. Another area which I can talk about in terms of behavioral problems is the child who's constantly turning and distracting other children. They're not distracting other children deliberately, but because of the surge of emotion that they're feeling and they don't know what to do with it, they need to somehow physically regulate. Let's try and understand what we can do as teachers when an entire classroom full of teenagers with such high hormones and physical changes are acting up. First thing is that we need to ensure as a school that children get at least about 30 to 45 minutes of physical activity. In fact, some of the boards in India right now have started insisting on physical activity every day as a mandatory practice. It is very scientifically proven that physical activity, especially for boys, helps them to regulate these testosterone surges, and it also helps them get in touch with their body and also to sort of bring out their emotions through physical activity, especially organized sport. With girls, regulation of emotion usually happens when they have a chat with a friend. And you may have seen in your own schools, even during the physical education period, you will have girls standing under the tree and chatting. And this could be their form of emotional regulation. When emotional regulation is given importance within the school, the number of so-called disruptive behaviors and disturbing behaviors go down. A teenager is not over smart, but in their search for identity, many teenagers tend to speak a lot more than they used to when they were younger. The same teacher may have known this child in grade 5, and when they see them in grade 8 or grade 9 usually, they find them very expansive. The teacher gets very irritated because they're not able to find an obedient child anymore. But as a teacher, I would request you to please look at the child from the perspective of a developing brain. When you look at it as a developing brain, you realize that there is so much that we can do. But when you look at them as being somebody who's trying to put you down, you're going to become a little more hostile. And hostile has attitudes from adults tend to always bring up disruptive behaviors from teenagers. When we understand physical regulation, the second aspect is where we can teach children a very simple technique, and a teacher can do this. One of the ways we can do this, and I use a simple set of questions. The first question you can ask children, what am I feeling now? When you help children get in touch with what they're feeling, it helps them find regulation much easier. So for example, there's a situation where you've given out the answer papers and the child is very, very irritated or upset with the marks. They tend to compare with others, trying to make sense of what's happening. They're not comparing because they want to feel bad. They're comparing because they're trying to see, is there some way I could have done better? They're not able to understand this new information that you've given them. And they're also immediately worried about what the parent is going to say, what are going to be the repercussions of a bad performance and so on. So when this happens, what we can do as teachers is we can have children sit down and say, or you can do a one-on-one session also, that's also fine. You can just ask children, what are you feeling right now? And usually some children will come up with, ma'am, I'm feeling very angry. I'm feeling very guilty that I didn't study well enough. So children are likely to come up with one or two emotions, and it's usually never one clean emotion that will say, okay, I'm angry. There will be a combination of 2 or 3 emotions. Once you're able to help the child identify from their own side what the emotions are, the second aspect will come in, which is when you can ask them, what would you like to feel instead? Because I've always believed that an emotion has a shelf life. It cannot go on forever. So a way in which we can move forward is to help children reframe that. And a good question to ask there is, what would you like to feel instead? And most children will say, ma'am, I'd like to probably feel calm here, or I'd like to feel a little more empowered, or I'd like to feel a little more courageous. The identification of what they'd like to feel is very, very important, because that sets the tone for the kind of coping mechanisms or the solutions that they will find. The third aspect, you could ask them to generate 6 steps that they would like to take to be able to reach what they'd like to feel. So for example, if the child says, ma'am, I'd like to feel calm, one regulation technique could just be a simple breathing technique. Another one would just be to take a few sips of water, for that matter. When they physically help the body to calm down, they set the tone for the mind to follow. And then when the children have generated 6 solutions, the teacher can sit down with the child and discuss with them what could be healthy behaviors that they can definitely choose from here and what would be maladaptive. Because when you start helping them look at their solutions and see that not all solutions generated by the brain work always, it also helps them to access the part of regulation that they struggle to access at this age group. So when disruptive behaviors come in, as a teacher, we hold a lot of power in our hands to be able to destroy the child, and we also hold the same power to help them redirect their behavior into regulation.